Welcome back everyone to the Vintage Sewing Machine Garage. If you are brand new, then thank you for visiting the channel and feel free to subscribe if you do. You can press the little bell symbol and it will tell you when a new video is uploaded. Videos get uploaded based on what's going on in the garage. So be sure to do that if you like. If not, you're still welcome to tune in, obviously. What are you looking at? You are looking at, and I will say this because I don't make over-the-top statements very often because I know I have to be able to try to defend those statements, but you all have heard me say that I believe that the Singer 15-91 is the strongest, most powerful straight stitch sewing machine ever built. And I still stand by that, but when it comes to zigzag sewing machines from the vintage era, I think that the Necchi BU series is really the finest, if not one of the finest vintage sewing machines ever made, and certainly one of the strongest. Now, you could certainly argue that Bernina's and some of the Kenmores that copied the Bernina dual belt system with the reduction pulley, I think you could argue that those are pretty darn powerful sewing machines. But just in terms of the gauge and the beefiness of the build of this machine, there's a reason why Necchis are so beloved by the people who are Necchi fans. And you all know I have never met a vintage sewing machine I didn't like, and I will always sing the praises because they all have their really strong points. But again, just to talk briefly about the range, of course the Necchi company, the Necchi organization, I believe, was started in the 1930s. Vittorio Necchi was an industrialist. He manufactured a number of items, and his firm made industrial sewing machines. They launched a domestic sewing machine. I believe this was in the late 30s. I don't think you see them in North America at that time. After the war, you see the Necchi BU and the BCJs, and these are mid-late 40s, and you will see the dawn of that design, which is incredible. The next version of the machine, there were several. There was the BU Nova and the BU Mira, and the one below it, which was the BU, I cannot remember. It's escaped me. I'm sorry. Maybe it was the Lydia. You guys help me. Put it in the comments if you remember. But the Nova, the basic machine was still a straight stitcher. And it makes sense because building straight stitch sewing machines, as costly as it was still cheaper than the more complex drivetrain and mechanicals that would have gone into a zigzag model. So the Nova and the Mira that you see here were basically copies of each other with a few exceptions. The Mira being the most expensive super deluxe sewing machine that Necchi offered between 1951 and 1953 when this was in production. It had a number of features. It came with, or it may have been sold extra, I don't know, I'm going to have to do a little more research to find that out, with the Wonder Wheel attachment. So not only could you do zigzag, but you could do decorative stitches. And I'm going to be doing a separate video on the Wonder Wheel once I have enough of its parts put together. I'm still waiting on that tire. Now, what else made the Necchi different other than the Wonder Wheel and the color? The olive or sage color was unique to the Mira. Of course, it has a very unusual setup for its motor, and I'm going to show that to you guys. Okay, so I turned the camera around so you guys could take a look at what is essentially state-of-the-art, leading-edge technology for 1951. Normally, sewing machine companies had different ways to control both the RPMs of their machines as well as the torque, the amperage of the motors. And if you look closely, you will see this is essentially, for all intent and purposes, it's the same type of sewing machine motor, the little clamshell style motors that you would see on any machine from the era. In fact, a lot of the mechanicals would have been designed in North America, because it's important to remember that right after the Second World War, a lot of countries were still trying to rebuild their infrastructure in Europe. And they were making things for the European market with a European specification to the electrical system. Different countries have different standards for their electrical systems that are different, say, than North American. And they didn't have the resources or the inclination to do a whole separate line. So the head, or the main body and chassis of the sewing machine, would be shipped to North America, and then they would source things like the cords and the motors, basically stateside, somewhere in the U.S. or Canada, and that way, they would match them as best they could to color. And I'm going to zoom in here, and this is one of the ways you can tell. And remember, they did not have computer color matching in those days, and even if they had, I don't know how much of a difference it would have made. But if you look close, there's a slight difference in the color. The body, of course, would have been painted in Italy, and they would have sent a sample of the paint and said, here's the sample, match that. And, they did a decent job. Matching colors is quite complex. And, it gets close, but not quite the same. You even see a change in the color from here to here. And this is original. This is the original panel on the back. And I believe I may have shown this in one of the videos I made as part of the overhaul and restoration of the machine. So why do I call this state of the art? What was the big deal? Well, companies would get power in different ways. If you want to have a powerful machine, you could do it with the amperage. And this is, I believe, 1.1 amps. So it's a pretty hefty motor. Some companies would use different sized pulleys to get torque and extra piercing power out of their machines, or they would just simply raise the amperage. Some of the Japanese machines from the 50s would have a 1.5 amp motor. A lot of your white sewing machines have 1.3 amps. Well, the Italians did something different. They decided to control the voltage of the motor electronically. Now, when I say electronically, I don't mean electronically as in the microelectronics in the smartphone I'm using to film this. I'm talking about early use of capacitors to control the flow of electricity. And you'll notice that there's a switch here, low and high. On the other side is another switch, and that's simply for the light. But this machine, similar to some of the Kenmores you may have come across later in the 70s, in order for this machine to work, you turn on the light. They don't give you the option of not doing that. I'm not sure why, but that's just how it is. And when you turn on the light, the electricity flows in, and you have low and high. Now, when it's on high, and we're going to start, I'll do some demonstration of the machine on high. This machine has a very high speed, but it sews and it has the same power as most other sewing machines. And I believe that the high is actually closer to what most of you are used to. Your vintage machines, a lot of them won't go as fast as this one. But the low setting is what's really interesting, because somehow by altering the voltage that's going through the motor, they were able to slow the speed. It gives you more accurate speed control, right? It will only go up to so many revolutions per minute, but the power is remarkable. And they were just trying to, how can we extract more power from this? And if you look at any advertising from the period for this Necchi, it talks about, it practically, clothing sews itself. They're always advertising convenience. We still get marketed to today with consumer items for the saying, it'll make your life easier. So anyway, I wanted to show this because I normally don't talk a ton about motors unless I'm doing a specific motor series. Now, this motor it has a cord that comes out of it, but it passes through this box. And that's where the magic happens. I'm sure they would have advertised it as magical, wondrous, miraculous, who knows. But this was why you might pay extra for the Mira, along with the Wonder Wheel. The rest of the machine, the magnificent construction, is all the same as it is for the straight stitcher, and then the middle, the Nova, the BU Nova, which would have been the middle machine. That BU Nova, by the way, would have come in black and sort of a gorgeous emerald green. And then the Mira, they did in this sort of olive or sage. I don't know what the official color was. I don't know what the name Necchi used per se. But anyway, most people call it the olive Necchi. And of course you have another extra lovely feature that Necchi added. You can see there's a little indicator. Normally, just above that, you'll see the top of where here is the adjustment for the pressure bar, right? There's that spring above the pressure bar that dictates how much pressure you get put on the pressure foot, on the sewing foot. And all machines have this adjustability going way back. But this one, you'll notice, has a little indicator with numbers. So, you go to the manual will say, well, what should I set the pressure bar at? Normally, you're told to increase or lower the pressure, but this actually gives you a way to dial it in. And if I tighten it, you'll see this moving down and the number goes up. And you can adjust that, but it's kind of an interesting feature other machines did not have. I believe this was also used on all the full Necchi BU line, not just the Mira. If I'm wrong, you guys please correct me on that. Now, there was something else I wanted to share with you. Necchis have, unlike a lot of sewing machines, the bulb for the Necchi, or the light, does not have a separate cord. The bulb is here. It's behind the little side compartment door, and it has a special wire that runs in and joins in and runs off of the same power as the main power cord. That's just how they did it. It's a very low wattage bulb, and I mean low. I forget, it's like 1.5 watts or something. Like I said, I always replace the bulbs, and if a machine comes to me with a light fixture, I replace the bulb. I don't know if they have LED versions of this bulb. This bulb is still working, but most of the built-in lights for almost all of these sewing machines were not very bright. They're okay, but if you get an LED version, that can certainly be brighter, or you can simply get an accessory, an add-on lamp, which really can light up your sewing area, and I use those. Or I sew in this beautiful daylight I've got here today. So, okay, moving back around to the front, I thought I'd show you something else. So I'm going to pick up the pressure bar lever, and it comes up, but then it can come up again. So you get a little more space between your needle plate and your pressure foot, your sewing foot, than you get on some other machines. Not as much as some of the Kenmores that would come later in the 60s and 70s where you can get super high lift. But this was pretty impressive, and I can even lift again. So I can come up here, here's the normal high, here's another one, and then whoops, I dropped it down. A little too tough there. And so, anyway, just another feature. The earlier Neckis and some of the BUs had a different tension assembly. They eventually would go to this one, which is just wonderful. It's really a refined device. I mean, you can dial it in, and you can just tell the quality is incredible. What else to share? The paint on this machine, this particular one, is incredibly mint. Now, I had several years ago another Mira. It was not my first Mira, but it was one that I remember because it had perfect paint, gorgeous paint, beautiful shine. It had been very well tended. All sewing machines are vulnerable to things like the dry rotting of power cords. You have to check those, of course. Neckis, like all machines, are vulnerable with their paint, and for some reason, some of the Neckis are more vulnerable than, say, other brands, and I'm not sure why. All brands can be scratched, the paint can peel off or wear away, but with Neckis, and I haven't noticed it as much on the olive tone machines, they can get stained, but the black ones especially, sometimes the paint will just lift and you can see the prime coat underneath. I don't know if it was a chemistry thing, if it was something going on in the factory, or I've also seen black Neckis that were gorgeous, so it's possible that maybe they just did not put up with the abuse that many of these old machines have been through. They've been put out in barns, they've been put in places you should never put a machine. And, you can still bring them back and rescue them, but just something I've observed over time. I don't often see singers whose black paint is peeling off in chunks. It typically wears away. But again, you all may have a different experience, so there are always exceptions. But the gloss of the paint is gorgeous, and the decals, they're not peeling. They're beautiful. You can run your hands across it. There's nothing. The clear coat if there was one applied on top of this, and I believe there may have been because something had to seal in these decals, are just, it's just in wonderful shape. You've got one tiny little nick here, and that's it. I mean, that's the only scratch I have seen. I'll zoom in. That's the one little nick, and this is a common place right along the edge here. Now, a lot of sewing machines have paint right on the rim, and of course that often can get scratched or bumped. But this machine, these particular Neckis have like a steel band, or some sort of metal band around them. But just that one little nick there, the rest of it is gorgeous. It's very unusual for me to find any Necchi with paint this beautiful. Anyway, I had mentioned to you all that I had one like that in a beautiful Italian table, and I had someone, in fact, they drove over 4 hours to pick it up. Not just because it was a vintage machine, not just because I was restoring them, because there are others of us who have restored vintage sewing machines where you can get them, but they really wanted one that was aesthetically gorgeous, and I charged more for it because it was so unusual. Because Neckis bring a premium over, say, the Japanese clones, and not saying the Japanese clones aren't bad; they make magnificent sewing machines. But there's the Necchi has a particular following. I have noticed people who sew outdoor fabrics particularly love these machines because they are not only powerful, but they have a powerful zigzag, and that's really important when you're locking in corners and seams. Whether you're sewing a camping tent, a bimini top for a boat, etc. Now, I thought I would just go ahead and demonstrate her sewing capability here. And one other thing to mention to you all is that Neckis, if you're going to restore a sewing machine or you're going to buy one, you might want to, you're going to go through, I've talked in other videos about what you should do to, when you're looking at a sewing machine, you're thinking about buying it. With Neckis particularly, you really want to come over and see even if your needle moves, right? All sewing machines can freeze up. Many sewing machines, sadly, were stored in attics or places where they shouldn't have been, and particularly with heat, the old sewing oil gums up. It can gum up anyway, but with heat really bakes it in, and it acts like a cement. And it can be undone, but it creates a lot of work for you. I've done that. I've rescued machines before, but Neckis are more prone to this, and the reason is because their tolerances, right? The closeness. I'll hold up this pair of scissors because when I say tolerances, some people are like, "What are you talking about?" Notice when I this is a really nice pair of scissors here, and when I close them, well, actually, let's just look at the gap between the two handles of the scissors, right? You see the space here. You have two pieces that are moving together, right? And you see the space between them. Now, the tighter the space in a machine, something like a sewing machine, the tighter the space between the moving parts, the less vibration you have typically, and just the less shaking you have of the machine, period. I've also noticed that some of these machines can run quieter. Now, motors have, they have a lot to do with the sound of the machine, but so does the actual, the way the mechanicals work together and how close they are. This is a theory, and this is based on what I'm imagining. So again, if you're going to get a Necchi, you always want to check it out. So a lot of times the zigzag or side-to-side movement will be frozen, even if the up and down motion works. Although that can happen to lots of zigzag sewing machines, it's not uncommon. I was very fortunate with this one. Now, this machine got the same procedure every other machine gets, whether it's gummed up or not. You take it apart. You look for anything that needs adjusting or replacing. The bobbin tire was dry rotted. You guys saw that in an earlier video. It was crumbling, right? As was the one on the Wonder Wheel, which I'm still waiting to order. The cord had to be recoated. So there are always things on sewing machines to fix, but again, with Neckis, you may find them more stuck, right? It takes more time, but obviously I think they're worth it. I wouldn't have spent that much time on this machine, but they're such glorious pieces of engineering, I couldn't help myself. The other thing, of course, is taking off the hand wheel to clean it, to lubricate it. Neckis have a special lubricating feature on their hand wheels. They actually have a a oiling wick and an inside hollowed rim that they used to oil, but getting it off the hub or off the drive shaft took me a while. I had to gently coax it so I could do that without harming the machine itself. The other thing, of course, to mention with Necchi's is, let's fly the camera up here just a minute. You guys have probably seen this before. Occasionally you will see this on Japanese copies of Necchi's Zigzag design. But I'd like to show this to you guys. Some of you are seeing a Necchi video for the first time. You see all these little places that look like oiling ports, and they are. But if you just put a drop of oil on it, it will pool because there's a cap to the oiling hole, and it's spring-loaded. So if I push down, see if I can zoom in on this thing, give a little bit better, see if you guys can see, kind of get a little bit better view of what's happening here. See if this will show up a little bit better for you. See if we can get it focused. Okay, so you can do this with the tip of your oiler. I have like a brass tipped oiler. If you have a bigger plastic oiler, you may have to take a pin or something. Take a sewing pin and push it down. But notice when I push in, I've got my little seam ripper here to show you. Pushing in, and now you see the hole. And then when you're done, the spring pushes the cap back up to seal it out for dust. These are the little details that Necchi had, and I think Necchi was the first company to utilize these, I believe, which again was another innovation. And keep in mind that many of us, of course, are used to, I'm going to lower the camera back down a bit, we are used to being able to have needles in different positions, but not in 1951. A lot of sewing machines, you couldn't move the needle. And of course, you can, it's currently set at the center needle position. But of course, you could come over to the left. If you look down here, you'll see the needle moving center and then to the right. Again, another feature that was, hey, we have adjustable needle position if a sewing technique required it. Of course, the biggest innovation of all was zigzag. Now, we take that for granted today. I would imagine almost every new sewing machine today has zigzag at a minimum, along with lots of other fancy stitches that they promise. Well, Necchi was the first company to introduce zigzag in a domestic sewing machine to North America, to my knowledge, at least in terms of on a major scale. And it was a huge hit. It was a real innovation at its time. And remember, there are no sergers for use in the home. So, you know, it's slow going when you want to cover up the edge, you know, cover up a seam or an edge on a piece of woven fabric. You don't want it to ravel. And this really was a game changer. Now, you could still get the straight stitch version of this machine. It's a great sewing machine. But you could get that in many other brands. But getting the zigzag was a huge deal. And it made a lot of waves in 1951. Remember, it's only 6 years after the end of the Second World War. And zigzag was not totally new in sewing generally because industrial machines had zigzag for quite a while. It sometimes took years for features in industrial machines to make their way into domestic scale or grade home sewing machines. And that's what this is. The Necchi company had a heritage of making industrial sewing machines. I believe this is not. This is a domestic sewing machine. If you see people advertising these as industrial, they're not. I can see why someone might innocently, not knowing, think it was, because not only is it all metal, the gauge of the steel is unbelievable. This is a very heavy machine, and you know you can understand why that really beefy spring support exists in the table underneath to help you lift it. What else to say? Everything about this machine is extremely heavy duty for a domestic sewing machine, and it uses high shank sewing feet, which are easy to get. So if you've never had one of these and you're interested in this machine, know that high shank sewing feet and attachments are easy to find because they're the same shank that are used in most industrial lock stitch machines. Right? So they're very common. They're not costly. You can find them. You can order them. You can get new versions. You can get vintage versions. I love the vintage versions because I think even they are made better than the new ones. Here is a later high shank, just to show you can still get them. This is a zigzag foot. This is the original steel foot that's installed for zigzag. And this foot is got a plastic base, metal shank, high shank, and then it has a little, like these little, looks like skis, little metal pieces, and I think this was used to assist in getting fabric to feed under the foot. So you're not limited. You can also get, and I would include it if I had the original, you could get a straight stitch foot and even a different needle plate for straight stitch sewing. The only time you really will be looking for that is if you're sewing something like silk. Something's very delicate, which can pucker when you're using the plate and the foot for zigzag. Most of your fabrics you won't have an issue, but if you're a person who sews delicates, you might want that. And you can get these. You can get them. They're floating around there because a lot of people don't even know what they're for, why they exist there. It uses class 15 sewing bobbins, and you'll notice if you were to measure the base of the machine, not surprisingly, it is the same dimension and shape as that for Singer, right? The 14.5 width, 7-inch depth Singer base. And they did this just like almost all competitors to Singer, except for White and Kenmore, who eventually would, come over to the side of this dimension. But for years they fought against it because they were big enough they could say, nope, we're going to do our own. But most companies, Bernina from Switzerland, Pfaff from Germany, and Necchi, and all of the Japanese, they copied this dimension. Why would they do that? Well, so many people had Singer sewing machines that if you wanted to get one of Singer's customers and you wanted to get them as like a conquest, you wanted them to buy your brand, these people often had sewing tables, and if they did, they remembered how much they had paid for those Singer tables. They were not about to, except for the people who bought this machine, bought a table with it. They didn't want to have to buy another table. They were crazy expensive. What did they do? They actually ended up, many of them would buy something like a Necchi, and then they would have it installed into their Singer table. There are sometimes slight variations with the lining up of the pins, and that has to do with, the Italians were trying to use imperial, but they were already using metric. So sometimes there's a slight variation, but you can often make them work. And again, that was by design because people just had spent so much money. Now, let's talk about fabrics. I'm going to start off, see what I've got here. Got some heavy things. I have a size 16 jeans needle installed. I think it's an Oregon brand, made Japan needle. I've got a medium weight cotton here, medium heavy, not super heavy, and I've got 2 layers of it, plus I've got seams here, so I guess that we want to. There are places where it'll hit 4 layers of this, and this is similar to what I was doing some test stitching on as I was overhauling the machine. And I'll just get it set up, and we'll start out with a straight stitch, and I'll demonstrate this for you guys. So I'm going to come over here on the right, turn on my light switch, and I'm already set for, I'm going to put it over to high, and then I'll also show you guys the low speed setting. Now, I'm going to be, I am behind the camera and the tripod, and I've got to get my knee under this table, so bear with me. Okay, wanted to get things positioned a little bit better because it's not natural to sew on a machine when you're trying to film it. Okay, so I can pull my needle down. I don't have to with a Necchi, they're so strong. But let's see where I'm at. Okay, I'm on straight stitch, and we will start her off nice and slow. And actually, I think I'm going to lighten my pressure a little bit on the presser bar. Increase my speed a bit, and of course I have reverse. Most sewing machines by 1951, when the Mira debuted, they have reverse. Let's see, we'll come over. Oh yeah, she's making a beautiful stitch. One of the things you may notice, and again, although motor design has a lot to do with sound, so does the construction and the engineering of the machine. And I have to tell you, This is one of the quietest sewing machines I've ever come across. Not just this one, but the whole Necchi line. They just have a smoothness about them and a quietness that's just, when you sew with one is when you really kind of, oh, I get it now. Okay, I'm going to kind of bring you guys a faster speed here. I'll show you that this machine is no slouch. And it rolls right over that seam. So we got 4 layers of a medium heavy fabric, and the machine didn't even care. Yeah, it just didn't. Okay, let's come back, and then we're going to show off the feature that really made Necchi, it just got it a lot of publicity. And for those of you who are new to Necchis or new to Necchi videos, Necchi had a number of marketing styles and models, and one of their models was an aspiring actress, but she was a print model. Her name was Sophia Loren, and she, there's a wonderful, I don't have the poster of her, she's posing, she was modeling and standing behind one of the Necchi sewing machines. So back in the day, it's kind of a little side trivia piece there. Okay, so now for the feature that is really the big deal about Necchis, and that is zigzag. So I'm going to leave the needle position in the middle, and I'm just going to turn this little screw, and I'm going to come whoops, I do want to pull my needle up. Remember, there's no computer brain. My brain just turned on and said, oh, get the needle up, right? Because you don't want your fabric wiggling around. And I'm going to come all the way over to the right, which will give me the widest zigzag. The zigzag on here is pretty darn wide. You may notice as you get into the 60s and 70s sewing machines, some of them had slightly wider zigzag. Some of the Kenmores did. But for the most part, I mean, nobody complained because, oh my God, this is zigzag. Woo! It was, again, it's always easy to look back and say, oh, well, isn't that quaint? But it was literally state-of-the-art technology in terms of motor control and being able to do a zigzag, no zigzag attachment needed. It's hard to understate just how big of a deal this was. And remember, 1951 is a long time ago. It's almost 70 years. Okay, so I'm going to come down here and we're going to do a long, wide zigzag. And I can speed it up more. I'm going to pick up this fabric sample in just a minute, guys, and I'll show you this. I want you to see the stitches up front. Stitch quality is just amazing. And I say that about a lot of vintage sewing machines, I know. I realize that, but in the zigzag world, very few machines can compare to this one. And this is why when I say I believe it's the finest domestic zigzag sewing machine ever built. Definitely not only when it came out, but it's really, very few machines can pull off what it does. Now, let's take a look, and I think I'm going to, dial back my upper thread tension just a bit. Now, I think I want to show you, I'm going to keep the width of the zigzag, but now I'm going to come up and really shorten the length. And I'm doing this because I want you to see how it does short zigzag stitches. And you can see that the fabric is feeding a lot more slowly because I've shortened the stitch. And I'm intentionally going at this speed so you can hear. Now I'm speeding up, slowing down. Okay, let's take this out. I want you guys to take a look at the stitch quality. I have made what is essentially a satin stitch with zigzag sewing machines on many models. It's not, they can all do it, but in terms of, let's take a look here. We'll look at the top side first. Here you can see this wonderfully spaced straight lock stitches as I was coming down. That made my first pass, right? Went this way. And here I went into reverse. That's what that doubling over there is for. So locking in the stitch, coming back around, coming all the way down, faster. And then I showed you guys just a lovely zigzag stitch here. And let's see. And then I came back here and I shortened the stitch. And notice it got really short right here. And it is an amazing satin stitch. A lot of people compare satin stitching to embroidery. Let's take a look at the other side. Get that tail out of the way there. And again, you can see the orange, which is the bobbin thread. And just amazing, right? I used 2 colors of thread so you can see a little bit of the blue came through here, and this is why I adjusted my adjusted a little bit of the upper tension there. But again, if you like to do what's the term, bar tacking, you like to lock in stress points. I've had people sew backpacks with this. And now I'm going to show you, this is heavy nylon webbing, okay? So it's pretty dense. The thickness, you know, it's not fluffy, but it's a very dense fabric. I've got 2 layers of it, and then I've got this piece is folded over. I've actually got 3 layers of it here. It's very dense. I mean, like really, really dense. And there's some old thread here, so which is purple. We can ignore that because I'm not sewing with any purple. And let's see what it will do. Let's see. I'll come over this side first. I'll just take this end. I'll double this, so we'll have 2 layers, and then it's going to hit 3. I think that's what I'm doing here. Let's try that. This is an example of a type of material where having a jeans needle is just really helpful. I know some of you, we've all sewn with a standard, just a universal needle before, and sometimes they sew just fine, but if you want to avoid popping or breaking needles, this is a really good way to do that. Sewing more slowly with dense fabrics and using a jeans needle means you give your machine a little bit more in ways of, what's the word? Just more heft when you're asking it to do something pretty heavy duty. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and leave it in zigzag. I'm going to put it on the long stitch again because I want you to be able to see this in this fabric, which is kind of a nubby looking little fabric here. Now let's tilt back, give you a better view, a little more close up. What's happening now? I'm going to hold my thread tails just a little bit there. Now, that was 2 layers of this heavy nylon heavy nylon, and I got 3 layers here. And I'm going to go ahead and try it again, but I'll flip everything over. Cut my tails off here, get those out of the way, and once I do, we'll see if the machine can in fact do even more in the way of zigzagging. So, actually, before I do that, I'm going to show you the quality of what it did initially, so you can at least see what's going on here. I'd like to see 2, actually. Okay, so you see, here's the 2 layers. I start doing the zigzag. It comes into the 3, doesn't miss a beat, doesn't change. And over here, you see the turquoise side. Now, let's take these 2 layers, and I'm going... Let's see, how do I want to do this? I'm going to, so we can see what's what, I'll actually flip this over, and now we'll start with 2 layers, and then it's going to come over and it's going to hit 4 layers of this nylon, and let's see what it does. If a machine doesn't want to do something for you, or if you've kind of pushed it as far as it can, or if you need to make an adjustment of some sort, it will tell you. No, it's not going to beep. There's no computer in there to beep at you, but you will know because the machine it'll either change speed or you'll hear a change in the sound of the motor. Okay, let's start with the 2 layers. and see what it has to say about the new demand I am placing on it. The great thing is many of you will have a Necchi and you'll never need to sew anything like this, but knowing that you can and knowing the potential it has is very helpful. Okay, let's get this little thread out of the way here so it doesn't confuse what we're looking at, so we can keep up with what's what. We don't get confused. Okay. Let's see what it'll do. And I want to make sure, I may even loosen my pressure bar pressure a little more because everything's got to go under that foot. Okay, let's see what it has to say. Oh, before I do this, I'm going to switch over into low mode. I told you guys I would show you that. And that is going to give us a different level of power at the needle, certainly a different level of speed control. And once it goes over the foot, yeah. Now right now it's binding under the foot. So I'm going to loosen the bar even more and see if I can get it to feed. Okay, what I had to do there is I actually had to assist the fabric a little bit, and it's not because the machine lacks power. What you're seeing is you're reaching the limit of what can literally get squished underneath the foot. And no matter what sewing machine you have, if you don't have space under the foot, you're really asking the machine to do something it can't do, which is not really fair. So let's take a look and see if our stitches actually, how did our tension work? So here you go. You see me starting with the 2 layers. I slowed down because I was trying to get it under the foot. I get it under the foot and look, you can see the thread comes over and it goes from 2 layers to 4, still holds tension. Come across, these stitches look fine. Let's see what's on the other side. Okay, get some of these little tail remnants out of our way. Okay, now coming across here with the orange, and then you see me slowing down, and then you see here a little bit of the blue showing, but a very solid and strong stitch, and just amazing. I could probably adjust my thread tension a little bit more, go up a bit in this case. But that's amazing. That machine just went through 4 layers and it didn't mind. It didn't really fuss, other than me trying to squish things under the foot. So if it can get under the foot, the power this machine has is just remarkable. And then when you're done with sewing something ridiculous like that, you can go back to the high, which is your normal setting. And last but not least, I often talk so much about these heavy fabrics because so many people, they search for a domestic vintage machine because they need the power that the new ones don't have. So now, let's pan back out. I'm going to take something, sometimes you don't have a few layers of something heavy and dense like nylon. You have lots of layers of lighter weight fabrics. This is a very, it's not silk, it's like a lightweight cotton poly blend. Maybe it used to be a pillowcase casing. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see. I'll do another layer here, 5. Let's do 6. So now I've got 6 layers of this lightweight fabric. And so you're still sewing a lot. It's just, is it harder for the machine? I don't know. Those of you who are master sewers, tell me, is it tougher to sew a few layers of a dense fabric or many layers of a less dense or lighter weight fabric? Both of them can be taxing to a new sewing machine, but let's see what this old Mira has to say about it. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I've got 6 layers here. All right. Okay, I'm gonna maybe adjust my pressure bar tension a bit. Okay, what can we do with this? Let's see. go back to normal sewing as far as the speed on the motor goes. Took off really fast there. And we'll make another run coming back, and I'll shorten the stitch again so we can take a look at that lovely satin stitch that now all machines who do zigzag can do a satin stitch, but I have not seen one that can do one that's so fine it literally reminds me of embroidery. It's just remarkable in that way. But as you can see, it goes right through 6 layers, and it does not bat an eye, not at all. So there you go, and you can see the satin stitches I came across. I could even get it shorter and closer. But again, a very versatile machine, and you can imagine being in the dealership back in 1951, 52, 53, and the person saying, well, if you get the Mira, look what you can do. You can do embroidery. They would have called these decorative stitches, they used to call them embroidery because they were mimicking embroidery. Oh, look what you could do and all the things you could do and make your, I'm sure they sold it to the hilt. And someone went in one of those years and they bought the most expensive Italian sewing machine you could buy for the home. And in this case, guys, as you've seen on my video of the cabinet, I'm going to keep this cabinet. The pricing of the machine would have been somewhat less than the cabinet. Cabinet in today's dollars, that's US, is $37.50. I want to say maybe $27.50 for the machine. You are looking at, if you had to buy this machine and table today, right? No software, none of the automated features that new machines have. You're looking at $8,000. That's a lot of money. I mean, $8,000 for, I'm sorry, 6,000 US, 8,000 Canadian. That's a lot of money. And just imagine, whoever went and bought this, they either had money or they had the ability to make payments for how long, I don't know. But anyway, it's, again, a wonderful piece of history. And when you are looking at vintage sewing machines, again, if you've been listening to this machine and just the wonderfully quiet tap, tap, tap sound it makes as it forms its stitches, you can't help but be a fan. Like I said, restoring Necchis can sometimes, not always, sometimes require more patience. They were built with such exacting tolerances with the mechanical parts that they are just quiet, smooth, they don't rumble, they really don't vibrate if they're running properly. You have to really floor it to get it to wiggle at all. And just a true innovation in its time, and still, even today, almost 70 years later, one of the finest, most incredible zigzag stitches you're ever going to see, and I think it deserves the reputation it has. Thank you all for watching. If you have an interest in the Necchi Be Your Mira, let me know, and I'll be happy to set up a time to safely, socially distance-wise, show it to you. And or if you have questions or comments, just leave them below. Thanks, folks.